My husband left me with nothing. Then the bank called and said, "Ma'am, you need to come alone." The night my husband walked out of our house, he took his suitcase, his car keys, and every dollar from our joint account. He didn't even look back. Before closing the door, he said just 6 words, "You'll understand why I did this." I stood there in silence, wondering what I had done wrong. But 3 days later, I received a phone call from a bank manager. His voice was unusually serious. "Ma'am, we need you to come to the bank tomorrow morning." I asked why. He paused. Then he said, "There's something your husband never told you." What I discovered the next morning changed everything I believed about my marriage, because my husband hadn't simply left me. He had been preparing for something for months, and somehow my name was at the center of it. My name is Emily Carter. For 12 years I believed I had a normal marriage. My husband Daniel was the kind of man everyone respected. He worked hard, rarely complained, and always seemed calm. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago. We weren't rich, but we had a comfortable life. A small house, 2 cars, a little savings, and the kind of routine that makes you believe tomorrow will look exactly like today. At least that's what I thought. About 6 months before Daniel left, something changed. He started coming home later. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then he began taking phone calls outside. Whenever I entered the room, he would suddenly lower his voice. If I asked what was wrong, he'd smile and say, "Work. Nothing you need to worry about." I believed him. Because after 12 years of marriage, you learn to trust the person beside you. Or at least you think you do. One Thursday evening, Daniel came home unusually quiet. He put his keys on the kitchen counter. Then he looked at me. "Emily, we need to talk?" My stomach dropped. "What happened?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked upstairs. 20 minutes later, he came back down carrying a suitcase. I stared at him. "Where are you going?" He looked exhausted. "I need some time." "Time for what?" "I don't know." I stepped closer. "Daniel, you're scaring me." He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said, "You'll understand why I did this." And he walked out. No explanation, no argument, no goodbye, just silence. I watched his car disappear down the street. That night I couldn't sleep. The next morning I discovered something even worse. Our joint checking account had been emptied. Every dollar. The savings account was nearly empty too. I called Daniel, straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. Then I checked his location. He had turned it off. For the first time in 12 years, I was completely alone. 3 days passed. Daniel still didn't answer. I had barely eaten. I couldn't concentrate. And every time my phone rang, I hoped it was him. It was someone else. "Is this Emily Carter?" "Yes. This is Michael Harris from First National Bank." My heart started beating faster. "Is there a problem?" "There may be." "What kind of problem?" The man hesitated. "I'd rather discuss this in person." I immediately became nervous. "Is this about my account?" "Yes." "Did Daniel do something?" Another pause. "Ma'am, I think you should come in tomorrow morning." "Why?" His voice became quieter. "Because your husband made arrangements involving an account you may not know about." I couldn't breathe for a second. "An account?" "Yes." "What account?" He said something I will never forget. "An account containing $1.8 million. I thought he had the wrong person. "My husband doesn't have $1.8 million. Michael replied. "That's what I thought you might say." The next morning I arrived at the bank early. Michael was waiting for me. He closed the office door behind me. Then he placed a folder on the desk. "Before I show you anything," he said, "I need you to understand that we followed every legal procedure." I nodded. He opened the folder. Inside was a bank statement. My name was printed at the top. I stared at it. Emily Carter. Below it was a balance. $1,842,610.27. I looked up. "What is this?" Michael folded his hands. "An investment account established almost 9 months ago." "By whom?" "Your husband." My hands began shaking. "Why is my name on it?" "Because the account is in your name." I couldn't understand. "Then why didn't I know about it?" Michael looked at me carefully. Because your husband requested that the account remain confidential until a specific date. What date? He slid another document across the table. I read the date. It was 2 days away. What happens then? Michael took a deep breath. The account becomes fully accessible to you. I stared at him. Why would Daniel do this? Michael didn't answer immediately. Then he said, that is the question you need to ask him. I looked at the account documents again. There was one more page. A handwritten note. Daniel's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. It said, Emily, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I took the letter home. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour before opening it. Daniel had written several pages. The first sentence made me angry. The second made me confused, but the third made me afraid. He wrote, I didn't leave because I stopped caring about you. Then, I left because someone close to us has been stealing from our family for years. I stopped reading. Someone close to us? Who? Daniel continued. He explained that months earlier he had discovered unusual withdrawals from an old family investment. At first, he believed it was a mistake. Then he investigated. The money had been transferred through several accounts. And eventually, it led back to someone I knew. Someone who had been inside our home. Someone we trusted. Daniel didn't write the person's name. Instead, he wrote, if I tell you now, you'll confront them before I have proof. Then he explained why he had taken the money from our joint account. He hadn't spent it. He had moved it into an account controlled by him temporarily. But the money wasn't ours. It was evidence. He was afraid that if the person discovered what he knew, they would destroy the records. I kept reading. Then I reached the final page. Daniel wrote, there is one thing I need you to understand. I didn't disappear because I wanted to abandon you. I disappeared because I needed them to believe you were completely alone. There was only one person who had access to our financial paperwork. Daniel's older brother, Mark. Mark had helped Daniel with investments for years. He had visited our house every weekend. He knew our passwords. He knew where we kept documents. And most importantly, he knew exactly how much money we had. I called him. Mark, I need to ask you something. He immediately became defensive. What happened? Did Daniel tell you he was investigating the family investments? Silence. Then Mark laughed. What are you talking about? I knew that laugh. It wasn't normal. It was nervous. I asked again, did he? Mark's voice changed. Emily, you need to stay out of this. I froze. Stay out of what? He hung up. That was the moment I knew Daniel had been telling the truth. Someone was hiding something. That evening I received a text from an unknown number. It said, stop looking for Daniel. I stared at the screen. Another message arrived. You don't know what you're getting into. I immediately called the police. They advised me not to confront anyone and to preserve the messages. I barely slept that night. The next morning I returned to the bank. Michael gave me another envelope. This was delivered yesterday, he said. Inside was a small USB drive and a note. Daniel's handwriting again. Watch this only when you're ready to know the truth. I took the drive home. I plugged it into my computer. There were dozens of files, bank records, emails, property documents, transfers. Then I saw something that made my entire body go still. A document containing Mark's signature. He had been transferring money from a family trust into accounts controlled by him. For years. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. The final file contained a recorded conversation. Daniel had secretly documented a meeting with Mark. And in that recording, Mark admitted everything. He had been taking money from the family trust. When Daniel discovered it, Mark panicked. He wanted Daniel to remain silent. Daniel refused. That's when Mark threatened to destroy Daniel financially. And Daniel realized that the only way to protect the evidence was to disappear. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. Why did Daniel make me believe he had abandoned me? Why didn't he tell me? I called Michael. He told me something Daniel had specifically requested. Your husband believed you were being monitored. I stared at the phone. Monitored by whom? We don't know. But why didn't he tell me? Michael sighed. Because he believed that if you knew everything, you might accidentally reveal it. I felt angry. After 12 years together, Daniel had decided I couldn't handle the truth. But then Michael said something that changed my anger into fear. He also believed someone might try to use you to get to him. I didn't know what to say. Daniel had been protecting me without telling me he was protecting me. 2 days later, the $1.8 million account became accessible. But I didn't touch the money. Instead, I waited. That evening, around 9:30, someone knocked on my door. I froze. I looked through the window. It was Daniel. He looked exhausted. He had lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled. But he was alive. I opened the door. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "Was any of it real?" Daniel looked at me. "The marriage?" I nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "Emily, that was the only part of my life that was real. I didn't hug him. I didn't forgive him. I simply asked, why?" He explained everything. He had been working with investigators. They had been building a case against Mark. And they needed Mark to believe Daniel had no money and no protection. That's why Daniel emptied our accounts. That's why he disappeared. That's why he let everyone believe our marriage had fallen apart. Then Daniel said something that I wasn't prepared to hear. "There was one more reason I left." "What?" "I wanted to see who would come looking for you." I stared at him. He continued, "Because I knew the people involved would eventually try to contact you." And they did. The messages, the threats, the strange calls. Everything had happened exactly as Daniel expected. But there was still something Daniel hadn't told me. I noticed it immediately. "There's something you're not saying." He looked away. "Emily, what is it?" He finally reached into his jacket. He pulled out a photograph. It showed Mark standing beside another man. I recognized the second man. It was our financial advisor. The man who had recommended every investment Mark ever handled. I stared at the photograph. So Mark wasn't working alone? Daniel shook his head. No. Then he gave me another document. It showed that the financial advisor had been moving money through dozens of accounts. And one of those accounts was connected to someone inside the bank. Suddenly, everything made sense. The reason Michael had contacted me. The reason Daniel had been so careful. The reason the bank account had been hidden. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a much larger financial scheme. And Daniel had been gathering evidence for months.
Weeks later, investigators arrested several people connected to the scheme. Mark eventually admitted his involvement. The financial advisor cooperated with investigators. And the stolen money was recovered. But the money wasn't what mattered most to me. It was the lesson. I had spent 12 years believing that a strong marriage meant never keeping secrets. Then I learned something more complicated. Sometimes people hide things because they're afraid. Sometimes they make terrible decisions while trying to protect someone. And sometimes love doesn't look like staying. Sometimes it looks like doing something difficult because you believe it will protect the person you care about. But that doesn't mean the damage disappears. Daniel and I didn't magically return to normal. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation. We went to counseling. We talked for months. There were arguments. There were tears. There were days when I wondered if our marriage could survive what happened. Eventually, we understood something. The biggest problem wasn't the money. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't even the lies. It was that we had stopped communicating. Daniel had tried to protect me by shutting me out, and I had trusted him so completely that I never questioned the changes I saw. We both learned from that. A year later, I received a letter from the bank. It contained a final statement. The account balance was still there. $1.8 million. But I didn't see it as a fortune anymore. I saw it as a reminder of the night I thought my life was over. The night my husband walked away. The night I believed I had lost everything. Because sometimes, the person who walks away isn't always running from you. Sometimes they're running toward an answer. But there is one thing I wish Daniel had understood sooner. You can't protect a relationship by destroying trust. And you can't protect someone by making every decision for them. If he had told me the truth from the beginning, maybe everything would have been different. Maybe we would have avoided months of pain. Maybe we wouldn't have merely lost each other. But we survived. Not because our marriage was perfect. It wasn't. We survived because after everything was finally revealed, we chose to tell each other the truth. And that was the real ending to our story. Not the money, not the betrayal, not the arrests. Just two people sitting across from each other, finally understanding that trust isn't something you assume. It's something you choose to build every single day.